Good day, everyone. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. Your mental health depends on it. I am Cecilia Salazar, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Dean Bissoondial here, everyone. We truly appreciate that you're connecting with us today. This week, we dive into a very painful topic that can be very difficult to face and deal with.
Hi, guys. Vaughnette Bigford here. Just welcoming all of you who are joining us online, those of you who are also viewing us on television. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to your feedback in today's show.
Speak Your Mind is produced by Lifeline, which is Trinidad and Tobago's 24-hour support line that listens to the despairing and suicidal. Speak Your Mind creates a space for regular discussions on mental health issues here in the Caribbean, so we can start removing the stigmas associated with it and help you find some valuable solutions and develop better mental health practices.
Yes. In today's show, we want to find out what are the many faces of suicide.
It's difficult to imagine what leads a friend or a colleague or a family member or even a celebrity to commit suicide. There may have been no warning signs, and often you are kind of left wondering what clues you may have missed, but there are so many factors that combine to lead a person to dying by suicide and making that decision to take their own life.
Yeah. While there are many facets that can influence a person's decision to commit suicide, the most common one is severe depression. Depression can make people feel great emotional pain and loss of hope, making them unable to see another way to relieve the pain other than ending their own life.
Just hearing that, Cecilia, makes me emotional. Well, today we're extremely grateful to have with us Aggrey Burke, live from London. He's a British retired psychiatrist and academic who spent the majority of his medical career at St. George's Hospital in London, UK, specializing in transcultural psychiatry and writing literature on changing attitudes towards Black people and their mental health.
We're also happy to have my friend, Professor Gerard Hutchinson, Professor of Psychiatry at the University of the West Indies in St. Augustine.
And we have Lucy Gabriel, founder of Lifeline, which has been in the trenches, providing support for the despairing and suicidal daily for over 40 years in Trinidad and Tobago. Plus, Dr. Rampersad Parasram, psychiatrist, politician, cricketer, pundit, and former chairman at NCRHA, North Central Regional Health Authority.
And joining us today again is our good friend, a familiar face, forensic psychologist, Swayne-Leo Hosein-Cadogan here.
A packed show with a really powerful, wonderful panel. So let's connect with our guests and start the conversation.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences with us today. First, I would like to welcome our guest live from the United Kingdom. Welcome, Dr. Burke. So glad you have joined us today.
Dr.
It's a
Burke may be
great pleasure
having
to be with you. I started my relationship with him. You hear?
You're coming and going right now, so we'll hope that the internet clears up a little bit.
Yes.
So let's welcome Lucy, Miss Gabriel from Lifeline, and of course, my wonderful, wonderful friend who has a bone to pick with me, Professor Gerard Hutchinson. Everybody's looking so wonderful and happy today. Hi, guys.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody.
Dr. Parasram, welcome. It's truly an honor to have you on our set with us today. I saw your name has HHPT before doctor. What are those initials about?
It's His Holiness, actually, because I am also the spiritual head of the Sanatana Dharma Mahasabha, which is the largest Hindu organization in Trinidad and Tobago. So that's what it stands for. And of course, Pandit Dr. Rampersad Parasram. And it's a pleasure to join you all, actually, and to talk about this very, very important subject. And of course, to link up with old friends. I haven't seen some of you face to face for quite a while, but it's a pleasure to be in your company.
Well, welcome. It's a pleasure having you here. And of course, our good friend to speak your mind, Swayne-Leo. Great to have you all here with us today.
Thanks for having me as part of this esteemed panel.
Yeah, real esteemed panel.
Presence of mental health royalty.
So to those who have joined us live online, please share our show on your timelines, and we look forward to your comments and questions to our expert panelists. While I am totally in awe of this really esteemed bunch of professionals who have dedicated their lives to helping others, starting off our discussion today is some really unusual and sad news. That on Saturday in Trinidad, we had 4 suicides on the same day. A couple from Princess Town, Steve Jagmohan, 40 years old, and Charlene Rampersad, 38. And in East Trinidad, Joshua Williams, he was just 25, from Arima. And then Martin Montrose from Dabadee, all happening on the same day, y'all. What lessons can we learn from this situation? I will start with Dr. Parasram.
Well, that suicide is still with us. It has always been with us. It's a very important issue that we must all address, as we're doing here this evening, and something that must be on the front burner. And together as a group, I think we must begin to seek solutions and reach out to those who are in need. I think that's where I would like to start this discussion. There are lots and lots of people who are distressed. There's one thing that jumps out at me based on newspaper reports about the family that said that they could not make ends meet and they were in financial difficulty. And that jumps out at me. Because we're not talking about a pure case of depression here, but we're talking about social issues, which are also very, very important factors in suicide. So I think that's where I'd like to begin.
Very good.
I wanted to find out in your experience. I mean, and we could take it to anyone. I probably will want to start with Professor Hutch. Is there a particular type of person who is more susceptible to suicide? Is there a particular personality type? I mean, in your experience, do you find that there are particular personality types that are more susceptible to depression and suicide?
I mean, it's always difficult to try to identify those kinds of types, because I think it leads us to the potential risk of not identifying people when they are presenting signs and symptoms that would cause us some concern. So I think that obviously people who are very emotional, who have low frustration tolerance, people who have a history of mental health problems,
Right.
I think those would be the major kinds of categories. As Dr. Parasram said, I think people who are undergoing a lot of social distress, which is something we tend to underplay. But in times of severe social distress, suicide rates do go up. And this is
Right.
something that has been reported and discussed for well over a century. So I think that there is that element of social distress, and there's some people who are just unable to cope with severe social distress.
In fact, I'd like to add to that, if I may, that I just want to emphasize the point that suicide, like so many other human problems, they cut across class, race, creed, all kinds of things. And people from every social group under stress and suffering from severe untreated depression are at risk of committing suicide. But let's just throw in the mix people with a previous history and people who previous history of depression or drug use and those kinds of things, and who may be living on their own sometimes. I think it's still true to say that older people living alone are also at risk. And I'll send back, to the panel. I'll go back to the panel so that people may wish to comment on this aspect. But
let me also add to that a couple of other risk factors that do come into play as well. If they've had a history of suicide attempts before, or members of their immediate family have attempted suicide in the past as well. Individuals with chronic illness, especially illnesses that cause intense, prolonged pain for which medication barely manages, they are at high risk as well. Those with a history of trauma or abuse also. Access to firearms is one, but access to poisonous substances is equally as important. Particularly, we know culturally in Trinidad, Gramazone in the past has been the go-to method of attempted suicide in many instances. I know back in 2018 or 2019, I'm a bit fuzzy on the date, but I remember there was a panel that was looking at potentially banning the sale of Gramazone in Trinidad and Tobago. It's already banned in many other countries and controlled because of it was the go-to method. Pesticides are usually easy access, especially in poorer and agrarian societies and villages.
Well, I think it's fair to say that whatever is available to people, they would use. And the discussion on the control of pesticides and those kinds of things have been going on for quite a while. And of course, the whole issue, when you have access to firearms, so, the results can be disastrous, as I think we all know. But in preventing suicide, I think the control of pesticides remains a very, very important subject. When we have it, there's also the business about household bleacher, which is something that we must remember to keep out of the way of children and others for safety, but also locked away. Because we must remember that bleach itself is a very toxic substance. But coming back, actually, I would like, to stay with the depression, because we're here to really talk out about issues, and is to recognize depression, talk about our feelings, and actually seek treatment where treatment is available. And by the way, let me congratulate Lifeline in that regard, to have a line open where people who are despairing can actually call, and you've been doing a great job for a very long time.
True.
Yes, I was now thinking of asking Miss Lucy Gabriel, what her thoughts are on all of this discussion.
The thing is that what we have seen is a shift, not only from the way people would kill themselves, but for us in Lifeline, for the reasons why they would do it.
Mm.
It was in the past that most of our calls, people were concerned about relationships, their deep personal relationships, either marital, boy, girl, or with their family.
Yeah.
Now it's becoming more and more, which is what this couple killing themselves on Saturday points to, that it is to do with financial problems. It was very rarely with that. And it's also the understanding that when somebody, that the suicidal are not necessarily mentally ill, much less are they violently and criminally insane. But that it's the misconceptions about suicide, and also really that goes back to the misconception, to our stigma against mental illness. That really and truly we should get to the stage where we, the ordinary people, know as much about mental illness as we do about the common cold.
Right.
And unless and until we do that, people will. It's shocking when somebody says, and it's written quite often in the media, the person just killed themselves. There was no sign. There are signs if you look back on it.
Yes. Well, in a survey of over 6,000 US adults, nearly 22% of people who have been raped have attempted suicide at some point, while 23% who experienced physical assault try to take their own life. Do we find this to be true in our Caribbean people? I'll throw that out to any one of our panelists there.
There's Dr. Burke.
My understanding is, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Yeah, my understanding is that the rate of suicide has gone up 4 times among boys and men in Trinidad.
Yeah.
During the period of the pandemic. Here in Britain, the rates have not gone up, generally speaking, and specifically within the Caribbean and African populations and Asian populations, there is no good evidence that there is an increase of that kind. So the Caribbean, particularly Trinidad, is a special case, it would seem.
Interesting. Leo, would you like to add to that, or Dr. Hutchinson?
Well, I think one of the issues is the effects of the pandemic. I think we've certainly, I think even before that, I think it's important to know that the profile of people who attempt suicide is slightly different, or some might say significantly different, from the people who die by suicide. So, for example, women tend to attempt suicide more, although the ratio is declining, whereas men tend to die by suicide more. And here the ratio might be increasing, where the ratio of men to women is getting even greater. So I think that, so while it's a history of having attempted suicide is clearly a risk factor, there are other factors at play. And I think the need or the capacity to seek help is one. And I think our males are reluctant or less motivated to seek help than women. And I think that's a factor.
That is so interesting because we have found that in our research that a person may decide to take their own life, as we've been discussing, when facing a loss or the fear of a loss, like can be academic failure or being imprisoned or arrested or even bullying, shaming, humiliation, including cyberbullying recently, financial problems, as we've discussed, and end of a close relationship or friendship or romantic relationship, job loss, loss of social status. So we've covered many points there. Do you find these to be true in the Caribbean?
That's actually going to hold for the majority of the world population. And where we're speaking about loss, let me bring it back to Dean's original question about the trauma. Even when you look at it, so yes, trauma, a lot of individuals who undergo that trauma, they are at risk of committing suicide. And some of that actually factors into this sense of loss, because you've not only lost your sense of autonomy, you've lost your sense of control. Now you feel like external parties, external people now exert this control on your life. And it can get to the point where the last semblance of control that you have is how and when you die.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so many people will take that choice when you find that you've been debilitated by medical issues as well. So even your body is no longer under your own control. It's doing its own thing. So when I check out, that is under my control. So that loss of control, that whole sense of loss, it permeates every aspect in some way, shape, or form.
Wow.
Yes, in my mind, I think we also need to look at the question as to how our men folk in Trinidad and Tobago are able to cope with the demands of living in today's Trinidad and Tobago. Having said that, though, I just want to remember that not too long ago we were talking about the very high rates of suicide in Guyana, which is nearby. And so we need to look at that, yes. But I do also support the view that stress, trauma, loss of status, sense of self-esteem, and those kinds of things. And when one begins to see oneself as a failure, it's how we see our roles and what we call failure. So in the case of the people who died very recently and just making the headlines at the moment, if we take the story as it has been told to the nation through media, that they felt that they couldn't cope anymore, and for that reason they would take their lives, we'd have to really ask ourselves, what coping skills do we give to our young men and women, for that matter, to allow them to deal with the stressors that are so common in today's society.
Mm-hmm.
That is so true.
I want to ask Lucy. I mean, Lucy, you deal with persons who are basically at their lowest every day. What is there? Is there some sort of common thing that causes despair, or something that you find is occurring a lot more in the calls that you're getting with our people? Any one common source of despair? These days, I mean, let's bring it down to these days at least, you know.
It basically is that sense of loss. That if there are 1.4 million people in Trinidad and Tobago, there are 1.4 million reasons why somebody would kill themselves. It is when somebody gets to that crisis where who they really think they are is threatened. And they may have lived with certain losses, abuse, etc. for years, and they may even die with it of old age. But something has to happen which makes it worse. And even then, you'd call that perturbation. But even then, they may still go on and live with it. But it's when their view of the particular problem, the particular loss, constricts to the solution to it is, I will kill myself. And that is why. And they become separated emotionally from those around them. That is why listening works. Because we really are honored, or anybody is honored, if somebody who feels that way is willing to talk to you about it. And it's you having the courage to listen until the person decides to live rather than die. And that, for most people, is a very scary thing. But it is that you, beyond religion, etc., that you believe that in every human being is a spirit that can assert itself, and given the room, a safe space, they will find it. It could take you up to 7 hours of listening.
Wow.
But when you pick up that phone, you are prepared for the person to be in control of it. It is not about you, the listener. It is about the caller. It's putting everything about yourself aside to listen to somebody until they decide that at least for this day, I will live. So that's what it is. Who do you really, of yourself, by yourself, think you are? And you may only find that out when you have lost whatever it is, and if you feel that you can never regain it. You cannot build a new sense of yourself. You can't get out of it. Then the person you constrict, they become very calm, they do what they have to do. They clean up everything. And people turn around and say, but the person was distressed, but they were happy. They had a party for their friends, etc., etc. And again, they may have been the heart and soul of the party. Who's the most suicidal person you know? Probably the person who's always laughing, always there for everybody else.
Yes, I was going to say that of 3 of the people I have known personally that have taken their lives, they were all the life of the party. They were always the person helping everyone. And it's very shocking. But we have a little video now. This gentleman, John Nuremberg, attempted suicide in Vancouver, Canada in 2011. And he survived to talk about it. And he wanted to share how he feels about why people attempted suicide. So we'd like to share this little video with you all now.
On the morning of May 25th, 2011, I attempted suicide by tying a rope into a hangman's noose, putting it around my neck, and then jumping from a log, much like the one you see in this photo. Obviously something went wrong, and I survived. Later someone told me I was lucky, but that's not what I was feeling at the time. I wanted to end my life that day, and I was bitterly disappointed to find myself alive. The scars you see are from the rope burn I got when the hangman's noose unraveled. As you can imagine, it hurt. What hurt even more is I didn't have the energy or capacity to try again. It had taken more than 4 hours of hiking through the park to find a suitable spot, and before that, months and months of anguish. I was exhausted, mentally and physically. I had nothing left. I was done. Let's recognize that most people who attempt or die by suicide don't want to die. They just want relief from the pain. Rather than ask why the suicide, ask why the pain. Let's see mental illness for what it is. It's an illness, just like any other. Everyone with an illness deserves care, help, treatment, and support. The reframe in how we view mental illness and suicide starts with us. It starts with me. It can start with you. Are you willing to join me?
Wow. Powerful stuff. Powerful stuff. I want to welcome those of us joining us online. We do appreciate having you here with us today. Let's see what some of your thoughts and comments are, shall we? So Melissa Roberts says, hello. As a society, we act to news of successful suicide. What are the statistics like overall, including attempted suicide? If so, can it be shared? Latoya Charles Burrell says, do you feel persons that commit suicide is weak for not bearing the emotional, financial stress, or is it strength in playing and keeping with suicide?
Two very, very good comments there.
Yes,
Dr. Leo,
very
you were
good.
talking earlier about statistics.
Right. Yes.
Remember?
So I think most of the statistics we have stem between 2019 and now. I do know that Trinidad is the third highest in the Americas for suicide rates, with the reported rate, as Professor Hutchinson pointed out, the successful suicides are higher in males, whereas females tend to attempt suicide more often. I think in 2019, our global rate was about 8.7 for every 100,000 individuals in the country. Right? I think 2000 would have been the highest. It was at 16.3 attempts for every 100,000. So I'd like to say we've come down since then, but then the pandemic has kind of put us on the path back up. Globally, we're looking at about one attempt every 40 seconds.
Wow.
That's a lot when you think about it.
So Dr. Burke, what about someone was asking there about whether we would term it as a weakness or a strength? That was one of our questions from our viewers. What is your opinion on that?
Well, the people who attempt suicide can be distinguished in so many ways from people who successfully destroy themselves. The people who attempt suicide are very vulnerable people, and there is a sex ratio in which women are the main group that attempts suicide. But with suicide, it's men. And for suicide, most suicides have a number of issues going on. There is a stress without any supporting element in the person's life. Many of them have severe mental illness at the time of killing themselves. And what is severe mental illness? Sometimes it's psychosis. Sometimes it's borderline, a lot of times it's borderline personality disorder. Sometimes it's depression. Sometimes it's organic problems, and quite often there is coexisting physical illness among people who succeed in killing themselves. So it's a package. A lot of stress, very little support, coexisting physical illness, mental illness, and often there is this problem of a relationship that's going wrong and no support in dealing with the aftermath of that relationship going wrong or gone wrong. So you have those factors, and the question for the psychologist quite often, or psychotherapist, counselor, sometimes teacher, sometimes doctor, sometimes nurse, is how can I bring these things together to make sense? If there's an illness, you can treat it, admit the person. If there is no illness, what do you do? Provide support and an ear, listen to the problems that are going on, empathize, and give another appointment. That's always very, very good. But people who are at risk need friends, and often they don't have these friends easily available. So there's quite a package for the person who entertains the idea of being involved. A psychologist, a counselor, a community nurse, a psychiatrist, a GP, a friend. Sometimes it's a friend, that's all you have. It's a very difficult situation, and of course, the self-help groups loses facility for people to ring in to say, "I will listen to you." Those are always very, very powerful, very, very useful.
Good.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for all your comments and keep them coming. But we need to move on. Let's figure out, we know what the problem is. Let's see how we can deal with it.
Well, Dr. Burke started to touch on some of the ways that we can deal with it. Because people who have suicidal thoughts or aspirations, as he was saying, it's a whole package and so many different factors. It's not purely a medical issue sometimes. So some of the ways we can deal with it. How are some of the ways, as he's talking about going to a psychiatrist, but a lot of men, as we are talking, don't want to reach out. So how are we going to deal with this, doctor?
Well, I think Dr. Burke was making the point, even if friends, and I think friend is very, very important. Some people don't have that friends, relatives, and learning to recognize signs, early signs. I think somebody said earlier, they are always signs. These things just don't happen out of the blue. There are signs. To provide that social support system for the would-be suicidal person, to pick up the signs early, we need that. But I get a sense, and I could be wrong, and that some of us nowadays are afraid to reach out to people, or some people have been socialized in a certain way that when we approach them, they tend to become resistive or shut themselves away or lock themselves away. There is that. And so I think it's very important, though, that people must have information as to what are the factors that contribute to suicidal behavior and to suicide, and to be able to recognize the signs, and then to have, I think, the empathy, the courage. Sometimes it takes a lot of courage to intervene, and to try and persuade the person to get help, or to just be there sometimes.
Let me add to that, Doc, that sometimes as close friends and family members, when it is that an individual does disclose to us that they have had thoughts of suicide, I mean, first of all, we are still a culture where the discussion of the topic on a whole is a taboo, as is most things with mental health. And there's a fear or a myth that by asking someone if they're suicidal, or if they've ever thought of harming themselves, or if they feel like harming themselves, we're going to put the idea of doing it in their heads. There's a high likelihood the idea was there before you even thought about asking them. Right? And even when they disclose to us and they say, well, yes, I've had the thought, or I'm constantly having those thoughts, we have a tendency to feel as if it's our fault somehow. We've failed them as a friend, as a family member. And as Ms. Gabriel pointed out, it is very important at that point to step aside from ourselves. This is not about us or where we think we failed them, but in the moment, it is now time to listen. Right? And a lot of the times, this comes from pain. Psychological pain, much like physiological pain. It's like having a broken leg that doesn't heal. That pain doesn't go away, and it's gnawing at them. So how do we help you stop the pain? What do you need? And starting down that road is the perfect starting point for the conversation. It takes a while and it's hard, but it needs to happen.
I mean, I'm thinking, and I am listening to all of this, and we have so many things that tell us, eat healthy, you have a chart, eat your vegetables, your stuff, exercise so many times a day, drink so much water. Maybe there should be some more public, as you say, information out there about mental health, how to keep mentally healthy, how the signs to look out for your friend. Maybe we need some more education on our population of mental health issues?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that the issue of the stigma remains pretty significant and is
Yeah.
a barrier to seeking help. I think to the society, in terms of community, and I'd be interested to hear both Doctors Burke and Parasram about this. I think the society has changed in the sense that um, the sense of community has declined, and the responsibility that people felt before to reach out to other members of the community is much less now, as is the feeling that people should reach out for help from members of their communities. And I think that's something that we have to work on in terms of restoring the mental health of communities.
Well, actually, I want to stay with this. People must have more information. They must have more information. Of course, we also have to look at society today, as the lifestyles we have, where we live, with whom we live or do not live, and in fact, what we consider acceptable and not acceptable. Because suicide has been around from time immemorial, of course. I don't want to lose sight of that fact, but I think if we are having significant rates right now, we need to really examine our lifestyles and whether, in fact, family members are providing the kind of support that traditional families perhaps did, and communities, are they providing the kind of community support that is necessary to help people deal with their many problems.
Yeah. That's a very good point.
Let me just see if there are any more comments or questions from our online audience. I'm seeing one here from Melissa Roberts, and I think it's a very important one. How do you help people who feel they do not need help? You know,
How do you help people who do not need help, who do not wish to?
who feel
Yeah,
that
who
they do not need
believe
help.
they believe they don't need help. She's asking, how do you help them?
Well, I think that's a difficult problem for the person, him or herself, that one hears about. One usually hears about such individuals from their relatives. And the problem of communication is often a huge problem in society, particularly when one is suffering from what we call loosely, but we believe we have specific meaning, personality disorder. And a personality disorder can manifest itself in a number of ways. And one way would be to deny that one has a problem when one is fully aware that one does have a problem. So the question of the psychologist, the psychotherapist, the counselor, sometimes the teacher, who really has to find a way to enlighten the client or patient that it is not insurmountable to acknowledge that one has a problem. You know, one won't lose face if one says one has a problem.
Exactly.
In fact, one will gain a great number of friends and therapists and people who are willing to see one again if one acknowledges that there is a problem. So there is this issue of what kind of personality, and counselors are very skilled at actually persevering and finding out what sort of person is this. Is this a person who has problems dealing with mood, problems dealing with sense of self, problems dealing with self-esteem? And how can I help such a person to face up to some of the issues that arise from those problems?
Excellent.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a great discourse. But can we move on a bit to see to talk a little bit about finding help, because we want to make sure we touch on that before.
Rationalizing suicide is always difficult because most times we do not have all of the facts. Mark Hennick, another suicide survivor, gives this very provocative solution in his TED Talk in Toronto 2013 on how we can help. Let's take a listen.
Now, when we encounter the suicide of somebody else, we always seem to try to rationalize it. I hear it all the time. And I think that's because we're uncomfortable with feeling helpless and with not understanding. But since we know that our perceptions are created and continually informed by our biology, by our psychology, and by our society, we actually have many entry points for potentially helping and better understanding suicide. One way that we can help is to stop saying that people commit suicide. People commit rape, they commit murder, but nobody has committed suicide in this country since the early 1970s when suicide was decriminalized. And that's because suicide is a public health concern, not a criminal one. And it's a health concern, we know that. 90% of people who die by suicide have a diagnosable and treatable mental illness at the time of their death. And we know that with medication, with psychotherapy, these treatments work. So we need to make these treatments more available in an informed way to everybody. And we can be a part of that change, whether we have a mental illness or not, by taking charge of our own mental health. When we go in for our annual physical, we make a point of doing an annual psychological too.
I remember Lucy saying that before. I do remember you saying that before, Lucy. Die by suicide versus committing suicide. It's a learning thing. We're learning as well too. So it is die by suicide versus committing suicide. So we're basically saying that it's true. We are encouraging that if persons are feeling that they're not in control of their life and they require some sort of help, that they should seek some counseling or seek some guidance or seek some sort of mental health diagnosis or something. We're basically saying that. I think all of us are saying that. But, Hutch?
Yeah, I mean, seeking help is the first step. But as one of the comments mentioned, some people don't want to seek help, and I guess this is where Dr. Burke's comment about really getting them to that point. So whether it means going with them, whether it means getting the counselor to come to them, engaging in supportive conversations that would allow them to feel comfortable seeking help. I think all those things, the even allowing them to call hotlines and really, looking for ways to get them to engage. I think that is, because I think once they engage, the chance of them getting some kind of help is much greater, and therefore the chance that they would not attempt or engage in suicidal behavior is also greater. And I think we have come to a point where mental health help is a little more or less stigmatized.
Yeah.
People are more willing, certainly, to go to therapists and to counselors. So I think it's really to, as we've said, increase education, increase the sense of responsibility for your mental health. And as the guy in the TED Talk said, to get regular check-ins on your psychological health in the same way that you get, check-ins on your physical health.
I wasn't aware that you could do that, though. I mean, I wasn't aware that you could do that. That there's some sort of test that they can do. I really wasn't aware of that. Like, if I'm going to do my annual medicals, I wasn't aware that there's some sort of psychological test that I could take. I'm sure that there are lots of people out there that would know that.
There are lots, and they're not even that complicated. Something as simple as a stress screener, which just looks at what are some of the potential stresses you've faced within the last 14 months. Checking your basic needs on a whole versus checking your basic needs at work. And these are simple checklists that we can run through. Do I stop and take lunch on a regular basis? Do I get enough water on a daily basis? And when we think about it individually, this doesn't seem like such a big thing. But when you realize that all these little things add up to put excessive stress on us psychologically, and we've already discussed at multiple points today that the inability to cope with life stressors and it weighing down on us is that thing that puts us at the edge where suicide seems like the way out. Maintaining and keeping abreast of how stressed we are and engaging in proper stress coping goes a long way into bringing us back from the brink.
So if you go to the health center to do a physical, is there a psychiatrist or a therapist there as well that you can talk to as well as doing your checkups?
Well, I think the idea is even for physical checkups, people generally don't tend to do it unless it's mandated, let's say by the job, or people certainly
something has gone wrong.
Tend to go to the doctor when they have a problem, when they think they have a problem.
True.
So I think it's changing that whole mindset about prevention rather than treatment. But at most of to answer the question, at most of the health centers, they have days when they have mental health clinics.
Yeah.
And when you go to the health center, you can always ask about what days there are clinics and which health centers. Might not be in everyone, and then you could visit then and talk about your mental health.
That's true. Well, I know it's Thursdays in Pitti Valley Health Center because I went to get my flu shot at time and it was mental health day there. So I could not get my flu shot. But guys, this leads us to our next segment. Where is the hope?
Well, we know of one place you can turn when you're feeling overwhelmed. You can reach out to our friends at Lifeline. Let's take a look at this. Right. So we'd like to take this opportunity now to give our guests, our esteemed panelists, an opportunity to say their final words and any sort of parting advice that they may have.
On the hope for our nation.
Well, thanks a lot for inviting us along today. There is hope. I started psychiatry in Trinidad in 1970, I think it was. It's a long time ago. And the quality of work coming from Trinidad has remained high and is improving. The population is dispersed all over the world, like from Jamaica, where I'm from. But in terms of suicide, there is this issue of how we deal with loss and pain, and how we deal with violence when violence concerned towards others or towards oneself. I think education remains an important element. The social media will become more and more important. The willingness to have debates of this kind provides a tremendous element to the program that we should adopt in countries like ours. I think things are not going too badly. It's disappointing that men and boys are being suicidal more now in Trinidad. Hopefully that will be reduced with the efforts we are making today and with other coexisting initiatives in society. We must live in hope.
We must live in
Thank you, Dr. Burke.
Dr. Parasram?
Well, I think it's very, very important that the conversation that is going on now amongst us should be going on at various levels. At the level of medical practitioners, family doctors, doctors working on medical wards and surgical wards, servicing health centers. And it must happen at the level of community leaders. The more we talk, the more we share information, the more we raise awareness, I think we have a greater chance of dealing with this problem. And of course, humankind continues to progress in spite of our many problems, because I am a firm believer that no matter what, tomorrow the sun will in fact come up, and tomorrow is likely to be a better day. So I live in hope, and I hope that we all can.
Lucy?
I think that the ability to accept that we need help and to ask for it, and that we would meet those who would meet us on an equal level, on the level that we need not be perfect, that there is still something in us, that really the pain is the sign that there's something in us that is damaged and is seeking something new. And it is also that thing really, that we, when we don't lose our contact with others, that what may seem to be painful beyond words, for no reason, that cloud could lift. And that if we, and for those of us, those who would think or are faced with somebody who they feel is in danger of taking their own lives, what I would say is what Monica Dickens said. She said, do not be afraid. If you are lucky, you will be allowed to be present whilst the person saves their own life. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, well, I would
10
echo
seconds.
all the words that have been said. I think your mental health is the most precious thing you have, and you need to take care of it. You need to nurture it, you need to protect it, and you need to deal with problems when they arise. Don't run or hide from them.
Thank you, Doctor. And Leo, quickly.
All right. In many ways, we need to be our brother's keepers, keep tabs on each other, keep tabs on ourselves. When we're feeling overwhelmed, we reach out to the professionals as needed. Many people engage in first aid courses. Physiological first aid is beneficial also if we seek to engage in psychological first aid courses. It goes a long way in preparing us for assisting others, and at least gets the ball rolling with that discussion of getting them to seek professional help. We can triage and then get you to the professional help.
Yes, exactly. So thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. It was indeed a pleasure having you here with us today. It was enlightening. Thank you very much for your time and thoughts. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone who joined us online and for your questions and your participation. It's always appreciated.
Thank you, guys. See you all next time. Take care.
Right. Yes, and as we always say at OMG, let's be kind to each other.
Okay.
Thank you so
Goodbye.
much.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Yeah.
Bye.
Some of us will have our own stories to share. I do realise it's not easy. I'd chosen to hide my own depression, but jumping off a bridge slightly blew my cover. Sharing our stories is so important. It sends a message to others that they're not alone, that we all struggle to cope from time to time, and that it is possible to find a way through this. Like me, you might be surprised to find out how much compassion and understanding is out there once we start the conversation. When I was at my lowest ebb, in the depths of despair, George's bookmark and his message of hope was really powerful. Together, through increased understanding, by challenging stigma, and just by talking, we can all provide hope. We can all be part of the solution. Thank you.